What is the reason for this violence in Bangladesh? Is it only the reservation issue or is there more to it? Our chief news editor Nabarun Goswami spoke to top Bangladesh expert and professor at Jindal School of International Studies, Dr. Sreeradha Datta, on the issue. Listen in.
Is it years of frustration or is it something else? And did the Sheikh Hasina government fail to gauge the public mood?
The trigger, of course, was the reservation, the quota issued, which was the High Court ruling, was the trigger. But for the last year and more, I think the frustration has been building up over some of the measures that were undertaken by the government or not undertaken by the government. Not only were the elections in this January, perceived as free and fair, democratic by any standards, but more importantly, the levels of corruption which the government was not seen to be addressing, the flight of money that was going away, the high rate of inflation, the food inflation has been the worst here, unemployment has been very high. So there was anger and resentment at various levels amongst the youth and the student community. And when this particular High Court ruling came out, and the reaction of not only the the Awami League leaders, but also the Prime Minister. I think some of the terminologies that were used were extremely, I would say, unfair to describe what this movement was all about. And so that was really the trigger moment. But as I'm saying, trying to explain that, over the years, there has been many other factors which has contributed to this resentment and anger that the student and the youth are facing towards the government.
Do you think the recent re-election, which was almost opposition-less, that is also one of the triggers? People were not happy with what was happening in Bangladesh.
Yes, because Bangladesh, as you know, has struggled very hard for its freedom, and which is a context that they've used constantly, which is again the quota, the reference of the reservation, the quota about the freedom fighters. But subsequently, from 1991, there's a multi-party return of democracy. Again, 2008 December, we saw a return of multi-party democracy. So from there to now, like the last three elections were anything but multi-party democratic, and especially this particular January election was really an extremely creative moment for Bangladesh, where they put not only their own Awami Leaguers into the opposition side and made them look as if it's a free and fair democratic election. So, and a whole lot of, I'm sure many amongst this youth that you see on the street have been those first time voters who weren't able to vote this time. They weren't able to vote in the last previous election. So clearly, there's a huge amount of disappointment, and among South Asia by general is extremely politically aware. But I would actually pitch Bangladesh as a nation, as a polity who's very, very politically aware, conscious all the time. So the ramblings that was happening in the polity itself was clearly something not the students were looking up to or feeling very upbeat about. So as I said, the anger and resentment was building up for a while now.
Now, another angle, very recently, Sheikh Hasina, the Bangladesh Prime Minister, visited China. As per reports, the visit was not really a happy one, and it was supposed to be a 4-day visit. She had to cut it short to 3 days. The amount of funds and funding that China had promised, that was not delivered, and clearly Hasina was upset with China. Now, why I'm saying all this is because can there also possibly be a foreign hand in especially these kind of protests across the nation? It's not easy to sustain these kind of protests without some group, some parties, some elements backing them. It's a well-known fact. So can there be possibly a China and also a Pakistan factor to the protests in Bangladesh?
It's a difficult question for me to sit here in India and answer this, because Bangladeshi government would love to believe that. Indian government also probably would like to believe that. But I would argue that this movement it has its own genesis within the students, within the youth group, amongst its own, the youth. But at the same time, whenever, and we've seen that in the past, in the Shahbag movement and others also, that others jump in. So you're opening the space for others to come in. So it's not, I mean, and over the decades, we've seen how extra, powers outside the Bangladesh boundaries or even extra regional powers have jumped in to you leverage to make use of that space. But essentially this movement has been started by somebody. If you're asking me that, I would say a very, I think a very strong no. The movement from was from within the society, and I think that's the issue that one, the government and others need to address and understand, because the anger, the resentment, the problems that the youth are facing, that this is a clear reflection of the ground. And then, the counter repressive measures that the government brought in, again, was something which is unprecedented, and I would say pretty much unacceptable. I wouldn't put it past saying that Pakistan, China would others try and leverage that. But the movement was certainly not started by them. It's not a movement the students or the youth would want. They would certainly want to own that movement. And in the past, we've seen political parties jump in, dilute it, completely change the trajectory. So I really hope that's not the case here. But one always suspects in South Asia the way it is that foreign hands always have some role to play, but that's really not the dominant force here. So let's not. I mean, I would strongly argue against it.
Now, the question that everyone is asking is that what are the options before Sheikh Hasina right now? Should she agree to the demands immediately? Probably she has no other option left at this moment.
So the first option is, of course, there's going to be a High Court ruling tomorrow, a Supreme Court ruling on verdict on this, and I'm quite sure the Supreme Court would dilute the numbers and all of that. But the point here is that 1971 was a milestone, was a moment of history, which is what created Bangladesh, and nobody's ever denying that spot in the under its sun. But the point is that three generations have moved away from them, right? And now, for every context, if you're going to bring in the liberation war, how do you expect the youth to react? They have a larger world now that they relate to, which wasn't the case. So while the previous generations have been extremely involved in the process, and it's clearly the love for the nation made them do that. But now, after three generations, you're still going to go back on that quota. Is something that nobody relates to. I mean, irrespective of political parties, nobody relates to that. It's of course a different matter. If the government is trying to push something like that, they're bound to be, wanting to play that card. But I think that the world has moved ahead, and unfortunately, Bangladesh constantly harps back on that particular moment in history, which is something which is not relatable to the youth generation. They are looking at improvements. They're looking at how Bangladesh will catch up, which Bangladesh was doing 1.5 years ago. Bangladesh was the fastest growing nation in Asia. But look at what it's done now. It's economic. We've often seen how and Bangladesh, again, the growth story has been magical, right? I mean, everybody talks about its growth story, but the last 1.5 years has been a very deep crisis that nobody really is talking much about, and least alone Bangladesh government is really talking about, and which
Absolutely.
has affected the youth. As I'm saying, this is the highest level of unemployment we've seen. Food inflation is at its worst. It's not a pretty political situation that they are facing. So under the circumstances, it's been, I think,
It's probably a
their
lot of
demand for,
factors. It's a
yeah.
whole lot of factors that has contributed to this present situation. Lastly, Dr. Datta, of course, it is Bangladesh's internal matter, but does India have a role to play in here?
At
As in,
this point of
in
time,
pacifying things?
at this point of time, and I think I didn't address your last question as to what is that can be done. I think the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina is the only one who can address this. Firstly, to cool down the tempers, and open up a conversation, open up a dialogue with them. See what the youth want, see how the problems can be addressed. Because what we have seen in the last 1.5 or more years, that a lot of the issues which are arising, the government is not addressing. At least that's what the perceive for the youth. And I think a channel of communication needs to be, opened up. Please, the kind of strong-handed measures which has been used over the government has obviously not gone down well. So at this point of time, I think the government of Bangladesh needs to do that. But coming back to India, as you're saying, that India really needs to, stay away from this problem. It's Bangladesh's problem. Bangladesh needs to handle it. But of course, for Indians, the most important factor is to ensure that there are many Indians who are working, employed in Bangladesh, private sector and other areas. So I think their safety, and many of our government officers serving there, of course, their safety is now primary concern for India. I think that would be the first. And ensure that Bangladesh government is not undertaking measures which makes it more unpopular, but at least let there be not deniability about what is happening on the ground, understanding the ground issue. I think what we, for, India, I think really staying away is the key just now, not being involved. But as you know, given Sheikh Hasina's, close proximity with India, Awami League's historical proximity with India, there is a natural resentment against Awami or Sheikh Hasina tends to fall on India. But India really should stay away from this.